So now that we've covered the events in the Jedi Temple at the very end of the Clone Wars, I figured now is a good chance to discuss what happened to the Temple after the conflict, at least in canon, because there's some pretty big differences between the canon and legend stories here. I'm Colin, and this is Sci-Fi Deep Dive. Remember, if you enjoyed this video, to head down below and hit that subscribe button. So at the end of the Clone Wars, Order 66 came down and the 501st Legion was sent to the Jedi Temple to exterminate the Jedi operation there and shut down the Jedi Order on Coruscant. The resulting attack would become known as Operation Nightfall and would see the temple basically being ravaged by invading clone troopers. When the dust finally settled from Operation Nightfall, the temple was in some pretty bad shape. There was a lot of interior cosmetic damage, and, well, no major structural damage had occurred, and the building seemed to be still structurally sound. A large portion of it had burnt down, and a lot of the interior spaces were pretty much trashed. This is the state that the temple was in for the first few years of the Imperial reign, but pretty quickly, the Empire moved in to start securing the temple as its own sort of base of operations. Now, one of the interesting quirks about the Jedi Temple is it was actually built on top of an ancient Sith temple, and Palpatine had the intention of using that ancient Sith temple for meditation, and as such, the decision was made to convert the Jedi Temple into the Imperial Palace. So that became the primary directive, with the Jedi Temple basically being converted into a new residence for Palpatine. Now, what this looked like is kind of an interesting, weird little, inconsistency in Star Wars. A lot of books very early on in the Disney canon described it as being basically unrecognizable, that they had built a larger structure around it, and that the temple that you would know from the prequel eras was buried inside a larger, more imperial structure. But then when we see it on screen later, particularly in Jedi Survivor, it's very clearly just the Jedi Temple with some Imperial banners hanging on it. I think this is something that we can side with what we see on screen more than what we hear from the books. Perhaps the people who were viewing it in the books had less experience with the temple than we as viewers do, but that's beside the point. At the end of the day, the temple was converted into Palpatine's personal residence, with the interiors modified to be a large, lavish palace instead of a large temple for a religious organization. And this became the Jedi Temple's new official name, the Imperial Palace, and it would sit as the Imperial Palace all the way through the rest of the reign of the Empire, with Palpatine officially considering his residence to be the former Jedi Temple. So Palpatine would end up spending most of his time there throughout his tenure as Emperor, all the way up to his death at the Battle of Endor. However, the temple was still in use after his death because the Imperial Palace is more than just a residence for the Emperor. It would serve as offices for many key executives. Most notably, at this point, following Palpatine's death, would be the Grand Vizier, Mas Amedda, who also likely worked out of the former Jedi Temple. This was likely the case during the sort of riots we see on Coruscant at the end of Return of the Jedi. During these riots, we can actually see the Jedi Temple intact in the background and well lit, implying that it is still in use by the Imperial government at this point in history. Mas Amedda is likely operating from the Imperial Palace when he officially accepts the New Republic's terms of surrender following the Battle of Jakku. And from that point, the story of the temple gets a little bit hazy. We know it was still standing when the New Republic came to power, and when the New Republic moved to Coruscant, it was likely put back to work in some way, shape, or form. But we also know that the Jedi Order, as it was reestablished by Luke Skywalker, did not use this temple. So, what happened with this temple is sort of up in the air. I'm sure we'll get more stories down the line that define what happened with this temple following the end of the Galactic Civil War, but for now we know that after the events of Operation Nightfall, it was converted to the Imperial Palace, served as a residence for Palpatine all the way through to his death, and then continued to serve as an executive office for the Empire until the Empire's formal surrender following the Battle of Jakku. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this is actually very different from the way it's depicted in Legends, where the temple is sort of left in this dilapidated, destroyed state following Operation Nightfall, serving as a physical remnant of the Republic that had now fallen. I actually did a whole separate video comparing the temple from Legends versus the temple from Canon, and most notably focusing on its story following the end of the Clone Wars. If you'd like to learn about that, I'll leave a link up here to that video comparing the Legends and Canon stories of the temple. And I'd like to let me know down in the comments whether you think it's effective symbolism for the Galactic Empire to take and repurpose the Jedi Temple, or do you think they should have left it as ruins, or maybe even tore the whole thing thing down to sort of make a statement that the Jedi are gone. Obviously, there was a reason that Palpatine used that site, the Sith Temple buried beneath the Jedi Temple, but he could have just as easily bulldozed the Jedi Temple and built a new structure in its place, but instead he chose to use the temple. And if you have anything else you'd like to see me cover in Star Wars, you can let me know down below in the comments. Last but not least, if you enjoyed this video, head down below, hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the bell icon so you get notified when I upload new videos. So for Sci-Fi Deep Dive, I'm Colin, and I will see you next time.